Okay, it's a couple of minutes after 10. We'll go ahead and get started. Anybody, as you know, we've done this a couple of times now. Anybody that wants to can ask a question. We ask that you just be polite to each other, and we'll do our best to answer. Anything from you guys?
Okay, I'll start. I think I'm gonna start with just my biggest question. Let's get it out of the way, but I think a lot of the public wants to know a little bit more about the officer-involved shooting that happened. And I think my big question is, how do you educate the public on your use of force policy and kind of what's the active shooter protocol so that, can explain to the community kind of how that works?
We educate the community by putting it on the website. The use of force policy is all out there. It has been since July of 2016. So all you have to do is go to the website, you can see the whole policy.
Have you found that the community is calling for any sort of real in-person conversation? And would you be open to that if that would meet it?
We're in a tough spot. I prepared some comments because I thought we might go down this road.
Great, good.
So what I'll do is just go ahead and say what I want to say here. I'm not prepared to respond to that. I think there are some people in the community that are trying to make this a racial issue, and it's simply not. What I will say about this incident is that it was an active shooter. Google active shooter, and it'll tell you what kind of situation we had out there. To my knowledge, there have been no other situations like that in the city of Columbia. Obviously, you think back to Columbine, Colorado, and those kinds of things. Those are active shooter situations as well. It was also a tragedy. A tragedy for the Coates family, our officers and their families, our department, and our community as a whole. It's important for everyone to remember that there are two parties involved that are most important, and that's the Coates family and our officer and his family. Both deserve due process. For the sake of transparency, the Missouri State Highway Patrol has graciously agreed to conduct this investigation. Every decision we have made since our initial release of information at the scene has been in the interest of protecting the integrity of the Highway Patrol investigation and to allow them to do their job without any influence or interference from our department. It is not appropriate for me or any of my staff to engage in discussions regarding this incident and risk the integrity of the investigation. When the appropriate time comes, we will be able to discuss it further and the impact this incident has had on our community. And those are my comments. I know there are people out there that are clamoring for information. If they're curious about our use of force policy, I would refer them to the website. It's all there. But I want to emphasize that this is a situation that we have never experienced before in Columbia. It was an active shooter. An active shooter is an extremely dangerous situation for everybody involved. And the officers actually went into a guardian mindset trying to protect the citizens that lived in that community. And I think they did a remarkable job of it. It did end in a death, which is always unfortunate. But unfortunately, with active shooter situations, that's usually how they turn out. Either the shooter ends up dead or innocent people end up dead. And so that's where we are. It was an active shooter.
What the sergeant just passed out, this thing, is that kind of?
That is the order in which officers will think of things. The first, obviously, is the hostages, and then it goes according to that form.
It's referred to as the officer safety prioritization. Hostage, innocent, the police, the suspect or subject of our investigation or interaction. And every call we go to, we remind our officers to remember, don't place yourself in the inaccurate order. Some people ask us to place that subject or subject above the officer's well-being. And the officers deserve to go home every night. I think that everybody would agree to that too. And in this particular case, there's some people that are kind of asking us, why didn't we place the subject or suspect of this active shooter higher in this prioritization than the officer itself? We can't do that. The officers have a right to go home too. So we gave you that as an informational thing so you can refer to it, and not just in this interaction, but everyone you see with the police, because this is not just used by the Columbia Police Department, it's used nationwide.
So I know you mentioned some people tried to make it maybe a race thing. I think that maybe happened a little bit early on, but I know Race Matters Friends has emailed you and wanted you to make some kind of public statement on it. Whether it's even just what you already put out on the press release or just to reassure the community that all the proper steps are taken. And you might have addressed this already, but did you have any interest in actually doing something like that, or?
Not at this time, because of the protecting the integrity of the investigation has to be first and foremost in my mind. And the type of questions I was being asked or being suggested that would be asked were in direct conflict with protecting the integrity of that investigation. So while I can talk in generalities like I just have, and then refer you to the policy that's online like I just have, I cannot talk about the facts of the situation, and that's what some people are upset about. We will eventually be able to get there, but not at this time.
And that would be after the prosecutor.
After the
looks at it.
investigation is over and the prosecutor has reviewed the case and made a decision about what they're going to do with it, and then our internal investigation will start. But obviously, once the highway patrol is done with theirs, I'm sure they will do a press release or something that lets you know their findings, which really have nothing to do with the internal findings. The internal findings are for policies and things like that.
You guys haven't started an IA investigation yet? That's the normal procedures, wait for
That's
highway
correct.
patrol, and then, okay, I
That's
thought maybe
correct.
they would be at the same time.
Now, for the same reason, some departments used to, in fact, departments that I came from, they used to do what was called a bifurcated investigation. Internal Affairs took one side, the criminal side was investigated by another agency. But recently, I say in the past 10 years, it's become more common to run the criminal investigation first and then allow for the internal investigation to proceed. So it's just a change in philosophy across the nation with the police department.
I know you said you thought the officers did a remarkable job, but what you know now, you think does it look like it's justified?
I have no way of knowing that. I wasn't there. And
Have you
so,
reviewed any of the reports or
I have
anything
not.
like that?
I have given the investigation to the highway patrol, and then I'm allowing them to do that, and then I will review their findings.
Going off of that with the highway patrol's investigation, I think Lucas was saying that he wanted to know a little bit about the role that CPD plays when highway patrol does an investigation. He said that he saw officers on scene while highway patrol was doing the investigation, and so essentially I think that he just wanted to know, if officers are staying on, what's their role then? Do they have a role, or are they just staying there to secure the scene, et cetera?
Again, I don't know who he would be referring to specifically,
Uh,
but as far as the scene, we still have an active crime scene. So to get that many highway patrolmen here that quickly would be next to impossible. So my guess is, without getting to it, is that they were kept for scene security. And they were protecting the crime scene and the integrity of the crime scene until the highway patrol released them.
He's correct. That's our involvement simply was a support role, and we maintained care, custody, control of the scene until it was released to the highway patrol. And once the detectives get on scene, they're doing the crime scene, so we have to maintain a perimeter to make sure that crime scene's not tainted in any form or fashion. So they only sent us 3 detectives because they were short at that moment. So we were there just to provide scene security for them. That was it.
okay, that's good.
Will you be releasing the body camera footage anytime soon, possibly before the highway patrol investigation is completed?
That's a good question. No, we would not do it before it was concluded if there is any body camera footage of the actual incident. There's going to be some involved. The investigators will determine what that is and the value of it as far as what the prosecution may want to look at. So until that point, until the prosecutor says they're good with it, then we wouldn't be releasing it. And I think I'm fairly accurate there.
Yeah, some of the operators that arrived on scene didn't have body-worn cameras because they were SWAT-involved personnel, so they came straight to the scene, not to the department first. So I don't know how much body-worn camera footage there's gonna be actually of the incident itself.
So SWAT doesn't?
If they come straight, if it's a SWAT call,
No,
no.
I wouldn't get into all of
Okay.
it.
Yeah, they wouldn't, if they came straight here, no.
Okay, so do we know how many officers actually had body cameras at the scene?
No, not off the top of my head, because every patrol officer was wearing one, but no.
How many patrol officers?
I don't have to count on that.
Is the officer still on leave?
He is.
Yes.
How long has he been with the department?
I don't know, can we say that without identifying?
He's been here quite a while.
Quite a while. He's not a young one.
Experienced veteran
Yes.
officer? I mean, have you guys, either one of you, or any of you guys, I guess, spoken with him, or
Oh,
is
yes.
that proper protocol? Do you guys talk
Oh,
to
yes.
him daily, or?
Spoke to him that night, the night of the incident. And then
I keep in
John
contact with
Stacy,
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jeremiah stay in contact with.
And the Coates family, you guys have spoken with them, or I don't know what the protocol is for.
Yeah, the night of the
families,
incident,
like,
Chief
person-
Gordon was the incident commander, and he spoke with the Coates family, and I'll let you address that, John. You
Yeah.
haven't told me what happened.
Actually, it was another member of the command staff. I was the incident commander of the event itself, and I was still on scene. But a member of the command staff was at the hospital speaking with the Coates family. We passed on obviously our condolences, but then on top of it, we're honoring their request for privacy during this difficult time. And if they'd like to speak to us again, we're certainly welcome to do that. But right now, the Coates family was very distraught that day, for obvious reasons. So we made sure that they were taken care of, and we slowly exited out, so we weren't to disturb them anymore.
Other questions?
How long do highway patrol investigations usually take to
No,
wrap up?
it varies by the incident. You know, you've got a pretty extensive crime scene in this case, so I'm not gonna speak for them, but I wouldn't expect to see it for a few months anyway. Yeah, at a minimum.
I had a couple questions about another topic. I saw in the city source that CPD was implementing a new program for reporting sexual assaults, the You Have Options program. I didn't know if anyone could speak a little bit about that as to what it is, when the department started implementing it, et cetera, et cetera.
Which that one do you?
Sure, so can you
Yeah,
stretch
can you
that just a
go?
little bit? Sorry, we're so annoying.
Also, now this mic is way softer than my other one, which is.
Well, I'm pretty
so-
loud,
Hey,
so-
please, speak up a little bit. Sorry.
So we actually started this process, it's been a little while back. We saw the You Have Options program at International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference, actually a presentation, and got interested in it. It's not one of those programs that you just look at on paper and go, oh, this sounds great, we're gonna do it. They have a lot of hoops you have to jump through that are necessary before they will let you be a YHOP, what they call a YHOP agency. We are still in that process. There's actually a lot of things such as the officers get surveyed at the beginning of the program, and then after we do training. So there's a lot of different, I think, really good steps actually that they've built into this. So we're still in that process. Once we can show the folks that certify us basically that we've done everything we need to do, they will okay us. We can go out there and say we are a formal part of this program. So right now we're in process. If you haven't looked at their website, it's really, really interesting. I encourage you to go through and look at all the different kind of rules, for lack of a better term. But the driving factor behind it is that we want to make it as easy as possible for someone to report sexual violence. So whether that's through an anonymous report, whether that's you come in the night of and the victim is in complete control of the process. That concept is not really new to CPD, but we are expanding on it in how we're training our investigators to do trauma-based interviewing, the acceptance of anonymous reports. We've always been really good about not making somebody feel pressured necessarily to go through with full prosecution, but this training goes clear down to the responding officer level. So the driving theme is you come in, you're the victim, you drive the investigation. So if you say day one, listen, all I want to tell you is this happened to me. I don't want to get into all the details right now, but you may come back 6 months later and say, you know what, I've had some time to reflect on this, or I've gone to counseling, or I've gotten victim services. I think I want to go to the next step. You can change your mind at any time. No one's going to come to you and say, if you don't want to prosecute, we don't have time for you. Because there's just a lot more involved in these than that. So obviously, the more information we can get on the front end, the easier prosecution can become later on, because there are evidentiary issues that can be lost or can become harder to kind of shore up. But again, it's not every victim's goal is not necessarily prosecution. So we're trying to implement a system in the places that have done this. We fully expect and anticipate reporting to go up. Based on all the data out there that shows how underreported sexual assault is, I say in context that we hope it goes up. And we anticipate that it will. So hopefully, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be fully implemented by the end of the year, but.
Is it department-wide, like all officers, or is it just officers who want to be trained?
No, it's a philosophy. So the frontline officers are trained, like they went through a training where, you know, and it's very scenario based. So they will give them examples of, you go to a call, this person reports this, but they say they don't want to tell you what the suspect's name is or their relationship to the suspect. What do? We're basically training and ingraining in them. That's okay. We're not going to put any pressure on them to tell us anything. And that's, a lot of that just has to do with supporting the victim. The more support the victim has, the more likely they may become to want to do that later on. That's a very personal choice. And I'm perfectly honest with you, if you read any media reports lately about some of the higher profile sexual assault cases, especially involving college students and younger folks, to actually go through prosecution as a victim of sexual assault is very traumatic in and of itself, the way we treat victims in the United States, is my personal opinion. You are very much on trial. Every single thing you've ever done or posted on social media is analyzed. And while I support everyone's right to a defense, I think in some ways we have tried to we do a lot of victim blaming. And I think that's made this crime that much harder to prosecute.
And I read in here it could take up to 18 months for it to be like fully implemented in the department. Is that because of is there really hardcore training, you know what I mean?
It's a process.
Okay.
And the people that put the program together, it originated out in Oregon, actually at a smaller police department. They were very, I think, measured and thoughtful about how they put the program together, and they didn't want to just slap something on paper and say, hey, sign this, and you can say you're a YHOP agency. You have to show that you're very much committed to the process. I mean, we actually signed an MOU that says we will not disclose a victim's anything about the report to anyone without their approval. So family members, anyone you can think of, we're going to be very protective of that victim. And so I got to be honest with all of you, that means you may see somewhat of a change in the amount of information we give out about these crimes, and we're constantly thinking about how to balance safety with, obviously privacy, but those are two really important things. So given that the vast majority of sexual assaults involve a known offender, the safety and privacy thing gets kind of balanced. But that's definitely something you're going to see us be very, very strict about, I guess.
It could be like no press release at all.
Yeah, it very well could be that way.
Okay.
Because I think when you talk to victims, that just puts much more pressure on them. And honestly, even when you say, Columbia's still a small, relatively small place when you get right down to it, in how information travels. And so even sometimes to say, oh, this happened in the 1300 block of Rosemary. Well, there's only so many people that live there, and with all the public records and things online, it quickly gets narrowed down, so.
And then, I guess, when are you guys expecting this to be fully implemented?
I would like to see us sign the MOU by the end of the year, but it's definitely a process. So we've done officer training and in-service training, but there's front end and back. It's one of those, you've all probably done a training class or something where you take a survey on the front end or a test to show how much you know about something, and then you take one at the end. It's kind of that type of setup.
Is there any cost associated with becoming a YHOP?
No, other than, obviously the time put into the training hours. We have sent, they really encourage the trauma-based interviewing courses. We're very fortunate here that those are offered down at Fort Leonard Wood, actually by the Army CID folks. They've been using it for quite some time, but we've been sending people down there. So, and I've heard a lot of great feedback from the detectives that have gone through that class as to how even not sexual assault interviews, it's changed the way they approach interviewing victims of crimes.
Okay, my last question on this. You said with this program, you're probably putting less information out to the media, therefore less information out to the public about these kind of things. Do you think that's at all, endangering to the public then?
I think when we have, like we had here a couple of years ago, when we had someone that we felt like was, there's a lot of predatory behavior going on, we're gonna have to all come together and make those decisions. But I think you're going to see in the instances where we know that it was clearly a known type person, we're gonna be very protective of that information, because that's what we're telling the victim we're going to do.
Earlier, you were talking about how difficult it is for victims to
Mhm.
go through the ringer of, reporting it and going through the courts or whatever. You said that every victim's goal is not necessarily prosecution. What are some of the other ends that you see people pursue?
Well, I think for some people, closure in those cases is different for every type of person. Closure may be, I go through with prosecution. Closure may be, I report it. Closure may be, I report what I'm comfortable with, and I get victim services through counseling, places like, RSVP on campus, True North, places like that that provide support services. It's really different, I think, for every person. It's kind of like dealing with grief. Everyone deals with grief and loss differently, and I think in these cases it is probably the most personal crime that could happen to someone, and in that instance, everyone just deals with it very differently.
I guess why did the department, I don't know if you answered this before, why did the department want to become a YHOP agency?
We saw it, and we came back and talked about it, and talked to people, the detectives that were actually handling those caseloads or had in the past, and we went through and actually felt good that we were doing, several of these things. But we said, hey, if this is something, it's relatively cost neutral, if this is something that we can do that will encourage people to report, that there's no downside to that. And so we really just looked at the program and said, this is something, and you'll see, I've seen it just kind of increase in notoriety as it's gone along since we first started looking at it. It's getting a lot of traction. The IACP has recognized it as kind of a best practice program, and a lot of other law enforcement agencies.
I know you probably don't have any stats in front of you, but have you seen an increase in people coming forward with sexual assault reports?
I haven't looked at it this year. Since we haven't fully implemented it yet, I would say, it would be hard to say at this point, but definitely, we're gonna be very specific in when we, flip the switch so that we can have an appropriate measure, to the extent you can measure that. But if we say, hey, this happened January 1st, then kind of look at it afterwards. Because I really think a measure of the effectiveness, at least of us, part of it is gonna be us coming to you guys and saying, please help us, get this out in the community so people know that it's out there, and we're gonna be watching to see how the numbers go.
I'd like to say real quick, this is kind of a vote for Jill Schluty, because this is something that I think it takes courage for departments to do. When you go in and you tell other entities, we're not gonna talk to you about it, we're gonna protect this victim's identity, and we're committed to it as an agency. And so, I just wanted to publicly thank her for bringing it to us, because it's something that I think will actually have an impact on reducing sexual assault. I have always felt, having worked in 2 university communities, sexual assault goes vastly underreported for various reasons. And anything we can do for the victims to make that an easier process and encourage them to do something. Even if the only thing they do is get some assistance with counseling or something, then it's worth every penny of the process and training. So it's something we're committed to, and we're actually excited about getting it going.
So let's change the topics.
Sure.
I know it's still early on, but you guys haven't put out a lot of details about Monday's fatal shooting, including really basic details. I asked about like whether the shooter was the intruder or the resident. Why is that? Why can't I get an answer on why? Like which person pulled the trigger? I mean, I know you released the deceased person's name, but you haven't said whether he is the accused intruder or whether he was living there. Like basic details like that. Like I have trouble trying to get basic details like that,
Sure.
or getting in touch with somebody in the department.
And I think if you look back at our history of providing information, we will try to provide it to you as quickly as we can once we feel like it's not going to compromise investigative issues. And in this case, we're still, let's see, I left here about 1 a.m. on Tuesday morning, so we're now at Wednesday. So we're not very far along here. There's, as you well know, there's a lot of, when you get into homicide situations, the amount of evidence you have, including electronic media and things you have to go through, it's just not one of those things where we can instantaneously tell you, here's the lay of the land. If I thought I could tell you that and not compromise anything that we're looking at right now, it would help me to tell you, because you wouldn't have to bother me anymore.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you had the one guy detained and he's been released, and as far as I know, it only seems like there's 2 parties involved. And I mean, yeah, you know who the second party was. I don't understand how that compromises the investigation, just knowing which person pull the trigger, even in a general sense?
Well, or respectfully, I would tell you, Alan, that I have to make those decisions, and the Lieutenant Dickinson has to make those decisions. And so once we feel like it will not compromise something, we'll release that information. I gain nothing by withholding it from you just for the sake of withholding it. So I assure you, as we've done in the past, when we can release it, we will.
I mean, is there any kind of general sense you can tell me how that might compromise something?
No, not without compromising.
Other questions?
Just in general, if you get a call about.
I know that voice. I was sitting here going,
Yes,
who's
sir.
that guy back there?
Yes, sir.
Now I know who you are.
I'm working, but sir. That's right. Thank you for listening. I gotta get my train of thought back.
Sorry.
It's all right. So just in general, if you get a call about a subject that at least potentially could be mentally ill, and there's the potential, or you've already heard that he or she has done something violent or is prone to that, what's the process that you guys have when you're dealing, again, specifically with somebody who's mentally ill?
John, you want to talk a little bit about just and obviously
Yeah.
it's going to be very situational.
Sure.
He can talk in some.
There's a lot of what ifs to that, but generally, we know that somebody has a mental illness. We one of the officers that dispatches the calls is a CIT officer. CIT is a specialty skill, and there's a lot of beliefs that you only have a small group of people, not the whole department do it, because people have to really want to do that program. We've gone with the mantra of the fact that we're going to train not as many officers as possible. We're not going to have 100%, but we're going to train more than just what they would recommend, a small group of 15 or 10 or 15 officers. We want the officers to have at least the knowledge. Obviously, on any type of call, the first thing is trying to develop communications with the subject, but without compromising that officer safety prioritization. Normally, if we can get communications, and normally if they want to talk, then that's a good thing. That means they're willing to get some help. We probably, and this is be a rough number, but 3 to 4 people a week are going to get some sort of mental health treatment with police assistance. Our CIT program is very successful in the sense that it is something that's a change in nature for law enforcement, and it started a while ago. I don't know exactly when we started the CIT program, but it's expanded. And now agencies that don't have CIT programs are really suffering because the mental health crisis in this country is just going to get worse. So in your specific scenario, as long as there's no weapons involved, or depending on obviously the type of instrument, if it's a knife versus a firearm, that also dictates the distance that you can communicate with somebody. We've been very successful. In fact, 2 of our officers talked someone down with a knife just a few months ago, and they were in the next room. She was threatening to a very large knife, and very, very scary situation, but they did an excellent job of talking her down. So if we can get the communication started, you get the rapport started, it may take us an hour to talk somebody down, but they're doing a good job. Now, if you start talking about a long gun or a firearm, they can really reach out. That kind of limits our abilities. If they're inside, they're contained, that's one thing. If they're outside the environment, you're talking about a much bigger problem, because you have to take all those innocent victims and get them out of the way. But our CIT programs would be the primary responding units. So.
In terms of that training, is that just an ongoing?
Yeah, it's a
weekly
week
thing,
long.
monthly?
Yeah, it's a week-long training that our officers attend. The new officers who get it, they're starting to get it in the academy now. Then we have some advanced training. Of course, our crisis negotiators, they work mainly patrol. They'll be out, and they get even more training in it. If we have to, we can bring in a social worker or psychiatrist to help us. If this person is schizophrenic or bipolar and we're having difficulty connecting, we can bring in counselors from Burrell or the university. Those are really the odd situations, though. What we're seeing is you mix the mental health issues, then you mix the chemical dependencies that we see. And sometimes it's very difficult to determine, is this person having a mental health crisis, or is this person on some type of controlled substance? That's where we have a problem. Controlled substances is a much bigger problem for us at this point. So.
We have started training too on some more specific. We just did training on how to deal with folks with autism,
Yeah.
for, as an example. And so, while not a mental illness, they display some, behaviors of someone, but the way you deal with them can be vastly different sometimes. So we tried to also address specific types of training that people need, and I think the officers I went to have got a lot out of it. So as those things kind of come up, we try to address them. And mental health's obviously a huge thing for us. I'm very jealous of some of the departments who have a full-time, social worker on staff that can actually go out and actually go to calls with the officers. I think probably someday, maybe not in any of our career times, that will just become the norm. But,
I'm running late.
hey, Mark.
I got a thing from Ian Thomas too. Have you guys discussed that yet?
Yeah, we already talked about that.
About the active shooter situation. Can I ask you a question about that? The question he had was, maybe you need to be more public about the use of your use of force policy. And I guess my question was, why isn't it a good idea to have the intent to disable the active shooter? And I mean, it's not a good practice.
I read some prepared comments, and I'll ask for you guys' indulgence here I'll read them one more time since Mark didn't make it. First of all, I think there's some groups out there that are trying to make this an issue of race, and it's simply not. What I will say about this incident is that it was an active shooter situation and a tragedy. A tragedy for the Coates family, our officers and their families, our department, and our community as a whole. It is important for everyone to remember that there are two parties involved, the Coates family and our officer and his family. Both deserve due process. For the sake of transparency, the Missouri State Highway Patrol has graciously agreed to conduct this investigation. Every decision we've made since our initial release of information at the scene has been in the interest of protecting the integrity of the Highway Patrol investigation and to allow them to do their job without any influence or interference from our department. It is not appropriate for me or any of my staff to engage in discussions regarding this incident and risk the integrity of the investigation. When the appropriate time comes, we will be able to discuss it further and the impact this incident has had on our community. So that's kind of where we are on it. It's a very delicate situation when you ask another agency to conduct an investigation for you. And for obvious reasons, I can't be talking about facts of the case in the media when they're trying to investigate it. I could very easily influence it negatively for one of those parties in either direction, and I don't want to do that. While I understand the hunger for information, that's going to have to come from the Highway Patrol when they complete their investigation. And I want to publicly thank them for even doing it. This is the third time they've done it for us over the past few years. And I want to keep that relationship intact, and I don't want to violate it so that we don't have issues sometime where they either don't want to do it or just refuse us because we're meddling in the investigation. It's very similar to what happens when you have a victim and an offender out there in the field and they give it to us for investigation. And if we're out talking about all the details in the media, that can influence the investigation one way or the other, and we just don't want to do that.
What's your reaction from Councilman Ian Thomas calling for more transparency at this time, and even
To be honest, I haven't even read it. He didn't send it to me.
Okay, I've got a copy
Yeah.
for you, but basically he's just saying, at the next council meeting, I'm gonna bring this up as a topic.
Yeah, and he can. Obviously, he's an elected official, but, I would remind everyone that there are mechanisms in place. When this external investigation is completed, the internal investigation will begin, and Sergeant Tate will begin that, and we'll do that, and then we have the police review board. If there's somebody that's unhappy with that investigation, then we have that mechanism. So the mechanisms are in place to make sure that we're accountable. I would just ask people to understand that it's not always going to be released, we would hope, because we just simply, we can't. We want to make sure we're doing it right, and a lot of times that doesn't mean doing it fast.
Thank you, Chief. Thanks, everybody, for letting me do that.
Chief, a few months ago, you attended a community meeting about taking race out of traffic stops. One of the solutions that you were working towards then was the complaint cards. At the time, you didn't have a lot of data on how those were working. How have those been working out?
What are you referring to, complaint cards? You're talking about the consent to search?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the rest of the check.
Yeah, 'cause
We're using them.
Yeah, we're using them, I mean, and officers are signing it, I don't think it's really changed anything, it's just another level that we have gone to remind people of their rights during a traffic stop. But the officers are getting them signed like they're supposed to, they're getting turned in or retained them for records, but, it's really not anything else to it, it's just another level that we've taken to show transparency, I think, for the community to say, hey, we're not against you, you know, and here's your constitutional rights if you'd like to sign the card.
Can you look at before and after and say searches have either gone up or down
It's
since?
way too early in this system for that.
We hope to be able to, but I think before I made any kind of statement about it, I'd want to look at about a year before, and then a year of data, so that I make sure that I'm not looking at some anomaly of some kind. My hope is that they'll remain about the same, but that people will understand their rights better. I mean, there's nothing wrong with an officer asking someone if they can search a vehicle, but I think there is an element there that we're becoming more aware of and more sensitive to, is that we're police officers. We realize that not everybody's going to respond to us the same way. And there could be a level of intimidation there could be the level of just our mere presence influencing someone in that decision on whether or not they decide to let us search their car. So we're trying to become more sensitive to that. That's one of the things I learned in the discussions. And so as it relates to that, we're going to do what we can to make sure people understand their rights and that they're comfortable in telling us no if they want to tell us no.
So here's a question from Kitty Greathouse, our assignment editor. Give him credit where credit is due. Has CPD investigated or are y'all aware of Narcan-resistant heroin?
Who's going to be the best authority on the Narcan stuff, John?
Right now, we're not currently carrying Narcan. We are in the process of obtaining it through a grant. And then we'll train our officers on it. It's just, we have to sign an MOU, just like everything else, paperwork. I am not aware of what you're discussing, or what you've brought up. The Narcan that the Columbia Fire Department has used has worked very efficiently. So whatever heroin that has come up, no, we're not experiencing that. Something for me now to research, thanks. I'll have something to do this afternoon, so.
You're welcome.
Yeah, but no, we're not experiencing that. We've had, City Fire's had some positive responses to their Narcan uses, and obviously heroin is in Columbia, there's no reason to deny it.
Oh, sure, and I think the question stems from the fact that it is working so successfully, and, we want to make you aware, if you weren't already, that there could be something that could hinder that
No,
success.
I'm actually, that's something for me to look up this afternoon, so thanks.
I think she might be referring to as well, we're starting to see reports in other cities of like the gray death heroin or heroin that's cut with fentanyl or something like that where Narcan may or may not be effective, so.
Yeah.
And that's, anytime you take an illicit drug, you're taking, the other risk you're taking is you have no idea what else is in it. And we're starting to see more and more that there's other substances.
Are there any updates on the I-70 Drive Northwest double homicide from one back in March?
No, I wish there were. Obviously, we continue to receive some tips and we're trying to run all those down, but it's a slow process, especially with, any evidence that ever goes to a lab. Just, there's a great story for somebody, to be honest with you, is the state of crime labs in Missouri and how they're funded and what their turnaround is and how accessible they are. But those folks do the very best they can, and we've been very appreciative for some of the things they turn around very quickly for us. But directly about that, no, they're not. I wish they were.
Waiting on lab results, I guess.
In some cases, yes, but in this particular situation, as in a couple other unsolved homicides, we feel very strongly there are some people who know more than what they're telling us.
Do you guys have any idea who might have done it, or have you narrowed down in any kind of suspect pool or range or something like that?
We have some folks that we feel are very strong leads. As you can imagine, I think some folks did a good job kind of looking at the background of everybody involved, and one of the first things you get trained to do when you do homicides is what's your victim's background, because that tells you a lot about who the suspect is. And so in this particular case, we had, victims who had engaged in illegal activities, and that makes the pool that much wider many times. So more to narrow down. and sometimes that's a difficult process.
So do you think it looks like a drug hit, kind of thing, or drug related in some way?
You know, it's hard to tell. There's definitely that possibility, just given some of the things that we know about the victims, you know, that frankly, people love CaseNet. So we can't say that's not a possibility, but I think just the location itself, it raises some very large questions why there. But at this point, we're very eager for any information anybody can bring forward, because we do feel like there are people who know, and they have not contacted the police.
Do you have any updates on that third victim that was also critically injured, taken to the hospital?
I know he had surgery and went back home. So as far as I know, he's still doing fine, but he lives out of state.
Did he end up cooperating with the investigation?
I believe he gave a statement. To the degree of cooperation, I probably couldn't comment.
Any updates on Saturday's home invasion, or have you guys already talked about that?
We talked about that, and no, they're not.
So here's
You're talking about Monday? Sorry.
Or is it Monday or
Yeah,
Saturday?
Monday.
Was it Monday? Say, I
Yeah.
got my day, what is today?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Thank goodness.
Good one, Slim.
Don't take me clear back.
Christmas.
okay, so I have one kind of about like schools, CPS. So again, from TD Greathouse, worded very well, I hope. Dispatch records from last year show a number of assaults at addresses for CPS buildings. Does the department feel that there should be more school resource officers? Have police noticed an increase in assaults or disturbances at schools this past year?
We would love to have more school resource officers. We'd love to have more officers in general. And I think the school district would like to have more school resource officers as well. I think it's obvious the benefit you have when you have an officer that's on the campus and a part of the campus community. A lot of things can be avoided. If I had my druthers, we'd have an SRO in every school. That's just not financially feasible. So any efforts to increase that, we would be solidly behind, but it's going to take money.
And has there been a notice of any increased disturbances at schools?
You know, John, I don't know that there's been any more.
No, I think it's been what I would refer to as an average school year. I mean, we haven't seen an increase.
I guess what's the protocol when you're responding to, say, an assault or something at a school? I guess how many officers respond to that?
Well, usually the situation's already resolved by the time our SROs get there, so. We have, obviously the high schools have SROs, full-time SROs, and then we have one that travels between core and the middle schools. But if it's not one of the high schools where the SRO's in the building, the teachers and the staffs at the schools obviously do a good job of dispersing any disturbance before we get there. And usually by the time we're getting there, the two parties are sitting in separate rooms. It's just time for us to do our investigation and determine if there will be charges filed. So I compliment the school. The schools do a very good job of kind of diffusing those before they get kickstarted.
They've tried to do a lot more diversion. You know, they have teen court now in some of the schools, the MOU that have the schools and the juvenile office and law enforcement has kind of addresses the lower level now, when I guess we have 4th degree assaults. So they try to take the more typical, you know, schoolyard fight, one that doesn't rise to the level of serious physical injury, and deal with those within the school when they can. And we've committed to try to do that with them as well. And a lot of that's just to try to reduce, you know, there's a lot of data out there that says once you get a kid into the system, it's much harder for them to not be in the system anymore. So they're trying on the front end, take those lower level, whether it's a theft case or something like that, they try to take those and use diversionary programs. You know, usually teen court, which I've heard a lot of good things about. They've really kind of tried to expand that program, and then dealing with things internally. Not that they don't have the option of contacting the juvenile office or us, but we try to kind of use that as a last resort.
How many Columbia schools are using teen court?
You know, I'm not sure, and I heard it was instituted at the middle or junior high school level, I forget what they call it here. But it's relatively new for them, I think. When I go to meetings with the juvenile office, they've talked about, I know, I think over the past year, they've done some expansion on it. I think their plan is to try to have more of them. But somebody over at CPS, you know, Michelle Baumstark, would know a lot about that. I know it's something they've been working a lot on. And I think the students seem to, I think there's takeaway from everyone involved, so the students who are actually making the decisions about punishment, things like that.
The students were.
Yeah, so they're involved in like, they actually do it like at court, so it may be, you know, this person, so they're not telling them, hey, you gotta go straight up to the bathroom with a toothbrush or anything like that. It's just more, what's an appropriate thing for this person to have to do. So there's no criminal sanctions, obviously, it's just, they have it set up to where the students are involved and they hear both sides, and so they're really involved in the process, which I think is why it's been having some success for them, from what I've heard them say. I'd love to see them, but.
Yeah, me too.
Michelle Baumstark recently, this is my last question, but Michelle Baumstark recently put out a letter about some threats of a shooting at Battle. She, you know, of course, she said they were unsubstantiated rumors, but they were still taking precautions. They said there would be extra security personnel on hand for the second to last day of school. CPD involved in that?
Yes, but we have reduced our response, our resources that we're allocating. We originally had a plan to have more officers out there, but it's not necessary anymore. We made an arrest on that last night.
Can you talk about that for a second?
It's a juvenile case, we can't, but we arrested a juvenile last night about 7 o'clock for making terrorist threats.
At Battle High School.
Not as high, the student goes to Battle High School, but they were at Battle at the time, it was at 7 o'clock at night.
But I mean, the threats were toward the high school?
Mhm. Whether the person was gonna actually carry out the act or not, we don't know. But the statement was made, it's just like you can't yell fire in a theater. So the statements were made, so on arrest, we had probable cause to make the arrest last night. Our officers did a good job wrapping it up.
You know how old the juvenile is?
15 or
It's 15 years old.
Student threats were basically threatening to shoot up the school or.
Threatened violence against, I don't know the exact statement that he made, but it was threatened violence against multiple students at
There was
school.
a phone call that he left with the school.
No, it was text messaging, of course, and a statement that was made in front of other students.
A verbal statement?
Yes.
These text messaging other students?
Well, here's the deal, it's a very complicated investigation because it's like anything else at a high school. It starts one way and then explodes by text messaging and Snapchat and this and that. and
Every
and-
app that we don't even probably know about yet.
Yeah, I mean, so what we could just sit there and say is that based off the investigation last night, there was enough to substantiate an arrest. So probable cause existed for the 15-year-old.
But he sent text messages to other students or to administrators or?
No, not administrators. A statement was made, but then it was expanded by text messaging throughout the school. So,
Could we say text messages exchanged between an unidentified amount?
how about this?
adult
We'll
high
get a press
schoolers?
release put out a little bit later today, once we get all the, because they're still typing the reports today, they're still getting everything together. It was very complicated, but we'll get something put out today. Jeremiah Hunter, the assistant chief of patrol next to me, was very much on top of it yesterday, and the patrol lieutenant was involved, and the school resource officer was involved. So we'll get a press statement put out a little bit later, so you guys have the accurate information. Okay? Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
Is the juvenile still in custody?
I don't know. He was turned over to the juvenile authorities, and then, of course, what they do, we have absolutely no authority over.
So, I think going back to the original, so the officers that you plan on having there, reducing that.
Yeah, we're
because-
still gonna have additional officers there, but it's just not gonna be the number that we originally planned. You know, and also towards the end of the high school years, we typically start deploying a few extra officers just because of that pre-summer, you know, a little jittery, so everybody kinda gets worked up, and we just like to, so we actually have extra officers around anyway, so. But our school resource officers at the high schools are phenomenal. I mean, I agree with the chief. The benefits of having these officers and the relationships they build with these students is phenomenal. And I think it's because of the relationship this SRO had built with the officers is why we got the information we did that led to arrest. So
And it was yesterday or the day before that?
Yesterday,
That
last
the
night.
threats-
Last night.
The threats happened then.
That I don't know the specifics of. We were notified of the we were notified of the threats. You know, everybody starts to hear a rumor mill and, you know, oh, well, we're hearing this. And sometimes those start out, when you start at a school, the school administrators will look at it first and say, hold on, what? This sounds like a rumor. And then, once we're notified of the once we're notified, we begin our investigation. And that, you know, that's taking it up a notch. You're bringing police officers into it. And so, once we were notified, we started our investigation like we would on any threat against a school. We're not gonna take any chances on these schools, period. So, once we were informed, we started our investigation and we went full steam ahead, so.
And you guys
And the
are-
charge is terrorist threat.
Making a terrorist threat,
Misdemeanor or felony, do you know?
be a felony.
Felony, and, yeah, so when were you guys notified of it? Was it this week?
We'll put a press release out on all that. We'll get it out to you this morning. It's 11, but we'll get it out to you as soon as possible, as soon as the PIS can prepare it.
They were still wanting me to get something on Dawn Ridge, on the home invasion, that just texted me. Can I get some kind of comment on where we're at with suspects? Or maybe even talk about how, why don't you release the name of the original suspect you released?
Well, first of all, so I told Alan earlier, as soon as I feel like we have information that won't jeopardize the investigation, we'll do a press release on any updated information that we have. But in this situation, I think to release that person's name right now would, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, you guys would all go try to talk to this person or start a flurry of activity of everything you're gonna try to find out about him, and so that's what we're trying to do right now. So just as soon as I can get information that I can give out, I'll definitely give that out to you guys, but right at this point where I left here at 1 a.m. Tuesday morning, everybody else was here 4 or 5 hours beyond that, so we're still really in the very beginning stages of that, and we're still trying to go through all the evidence and everything, so it's not a cut and dried situation.
Do you have any other suspects at this time? Can you comment on that?
I couldn't say right now.
Oh, quick question, I forgot the name, Taylor, Mexico Gravel Road was the one shooting, and then there was another shooting or shots fired last week. Were those-
Edenton.
Edenton, were those connected? Do you have reason to believe they were connected?
Maxwell Gravel Road,
Yeah.
and which one?
Edenton.
Yeah,
Oh.
very weak leak connection, but probably. I think it's fair to say, yeah. Same description of vehicles involved, so. But we have no direct link, but I would say it is.
Any suspect information or, leads
Well,
on
we're
that?
familiar with the cars, but we can't, you're familiar with the cars, and you can sit there and say, well, these people own those cars, but without people coming forward and saying, I saw that person doing it, no, you can't.
Yeah, like what just happened with that homicide with that Darryl Pruitt.
Yeah.
That car was huge.
Yes, yeah, I mean, so we're familiar with the vehicles,
Yeah.
but you have to have people say that they were driving it or they were sitting in the passenger seat doing it, so. But keep plugging away. Anything else? We'll get your press release on that other thing.
Thank you. Thank you guys
Thanks,
so
guys.
much.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.